Hi, welcome everyone. This is our first ever live session of Meet the Author, and it's a very special one for several reasons. One of them is because of who is my guest down. Oh, she's here on me. I don't know if she's up there, which way she is for you guys, but it is Rebecca Maeve Hartwell. We are talking about her book, A Heart of Flame. It's the first in her Unlock series. I've had the privilege of reading it twice, and I have to say that it's even better the second time. So, anyway, since this is a book club, the discussion, be aware there will be some spoilers. So, if you haven't read it and you really want to read it, then I definitely recommend checking out her interview that I did over at the Writing Corner with Authors Alcove. Otherwise, this one is especially for you. So, welcome, Dawn. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hello, thank you for having us on.
So first, I would like to introduce, before we get to Rebecca, I would like to introduce Dawn Marie Manning. She is a longtime friend of mine and book lover. She also is an aspiring podcaster and writer. So Dawn, do you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and what got you into this book loving world?
Books were a world of escape for me growing up. I am an absolute bibliophile, love books since I was little. And so it's just an honor to be a part of this and to be like, okay, no, we have to buy this book because because I'm, part of this podcast. So it justifies me adding to my already quite large library. But yeah, so I'm an aspiring author as well. My first book is a collection of short stories and poems that are intended to be a tool for people who are in therapy or who are trying to explain to their loved ones how they feel, just to give them an opportunity to put words to their feeling. I found that many people struggle to describe the pain that they're suffering from and how it is that they feel. And so being able to give them the tools to do that, that's something I'm really passionate about. My podcast is a work in progress, but it's called Wow, That's a Lot. It's for anybody who has been through a lot, because every time I tell people my story, they say, wow, that's a lot. So it's anything that is helpful, anything that is encouraging, anything that is just plain interesting. If somebody's story has a ring of truth to it, or if it just might catch somebody's attention, it'll be part of my podcast. So that's something I'm really excited about. And thank you so much for having me here. I do apologize. I have a tiny bit of a cold, so if my voice is a little strange, bear with me here. And this is really exciting. Rebecca is one of our favorite people. We love to have on Rebecca. It's been so fun getting to know you through the months that we've been doing this podcast together, and to get to do your book is just such a delight. And we're just so happy that we get to do this with you.
We do have another person who will be hopping on, and I'm going to let her in so that way, because she's actually going to be doing the book that we're going to be doing next week. So let's let her in. And then, Rebecca, we will get to you in just one moment. We'll give her a chance to get on the audio. But I did want to give you guys a little bit of background on the story if you have not heard it. Give you a little teaser. But so imagine a life living your worst life, out of work, homeless, estranged from your family. That's where we find our protagonist, Angie. Great name, by the way. Angie Forrester. But things take a drastic turn for the worst when she's caught up in a deadly protest and meets, how do you pronounce his last name? Daniel?
Fall.
Fall. So it is fall. So when it says
Yeah.
fall, it is fall.
Yes.
Okay.
Lots of play things to do with that word, and lots of little ways to mess with it.
I kept going foul, fall, and then when I saw fall, I was like, is it fall? So they were saying fall. Okay, we'll get to that in just a moment. But their journey together is filled with magic, which is amazing magical system. It's my absolute favorite. I love the use of auras. I'm getting too far into talking about it. But anyway, that is what we're going to be talking about. And well, Myrenne, are you on? Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm so sorry. My video will not let me do anything. I'm having technical difficulties today. I'm so sorry.
That is perfectly fine. I don't think my audience can see you, even see that you're there, because I think it only shows if there's actually a picture. So you just seem like you're an invisible person right now.
Okay.
But anyway, so Myrenne, while you try to figure that out, I'm going to let Rebecca introduce herself a little bit. And then we're going to talk about your book as well, because we're going to be doing Myrenne Mae's book. And well, I'll wait till you're on screen to start talking about that. So we're going to go back to Rebecca for now. So Rebecca, do you mind just sharing your own interpretation of the book and what inspired you to write it? As well as a little bit
Absolutely.
about you.
So my name is Rebecca Maeve Hartwell. That's the name that I write under. And I started writing books just a couple of years ago and started editing at the same time. So I had a wonderful sort of ecosystem of getting feedback on my work and offering feedback and learning from that process as I started writing the Unlocked series. My original inspiration for the first book in the series, A Heart of Flame, came very, very much from my own experiences. Angie is somewhat shamelessly a slightly different version of me. She's a younger version of me who did not have the support system, who didn't have a good therapist, who did not have the advantages that allowed me to get out of bad situations in a healthy way. So it was incredibly cathartic and healing and therapeutic to write out her coping with the new and unique obstacles that I threw at her and let her explore the perhaps less healthy choices in how to cope with that than I chose to in my real life. So the inspiration came from needing to process, having gotten out of domestic abuse and dealing with the early stages of the pandemic. I started writing the book just pre-pandemic and ended up publishing sort of in the depths of it. So there was a lot that I was processing, and the biggest sort of light that I was chasing in the book was I wanted to give folks who were escaping bad situations an idea of not just how to get out, because there are resources on that, and not what the immediate aftermath looks like, because I could also find resources on that. But nothing had prepared me for what life looked like a year after escaping, 2, 3, 5, 10 years after escaping abuse, after getting away from a rapist, whatever the situation might be. So I really want to explore what that looks like, what that trauma recovery looks like much further down the road than I have seen depicted. And I intend to continue doing that all the way through the series.
Thank you so much for that. I actually, that was one of the things I really liked, because we had Shel Cypress on here, and I noticed that the one thing you guys had in common was that the magic system was intertwined with trauma in some way. And that's, I think that that is beautiful in a way. And I really like that. But we're going to back up, because I want to introduce our other co-host. So stepping in for Rebecca, because normally we have Dawn Marie. Amber Letters has COVID right now, so she's not here. And then we have Rebecca. So in her place, we have Myrenne Mae, and she's actually going to be our next month's Meet the Author. She wrote Three Coins from a Dead Man's Pocket. It's
Yes,
from the
that's right.
Did I say it right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, that's right.
And it's from the Realms of Souls saga, book 1. I have not yet read it, but Rebecca has and says it's amazing. So I'm very excited about that. So do you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself, Myrenne, and maybe a little bit about what we should expect from the book this coming month?
Absolutely. Thank you for the intro. And I am honored to be here. Thank you so much, all of you guys, for including me in this awesome day, even though I had those technical difficulties. Three Coins from a Dead Man's Pocket is a book that kind of came out of me being a stay-at-home mom and kind of leaving the workforce behind. And it started with the title because I think I heard it some random place, and I thought, why would 3 coins be in somebody's pocket, and why would they be so precious? And so this entire world just kind of came out of that. I'm writing book 2 right now, and just the intricacies of when you make a fantasy world where you get to make up your own rules and you get to make up your own magic system, like Rebecca gets that, where you make up your own magic system, right? And you're just like, what are the rules, and why am I going to break those rules, right? And my my book has things that we all love about fantasy. It has fantastical places. It has fantastical magic. It has its own language that I created. It actually also has music that goes with it because I do have a degree in music. And so we have created some music that actually goes right along with the books. And so it's very multi-layered, and I'm just super excited to kind of get it out into the world. And we ran a Kickstarter on it earlier this year, and I'm finally getting those books in hopefully this week, and I'll be sending those out all over the world, which I'm super excited about. But it will be available for purchase on Amazon at the end of the month. So I'm very, very excited to share and just to talk to others about, you know, the books that we love and the things that we love about them, and why it's very cathartic to write them, right?
And it comes out August 30th, right?
Yeah, August 31st, actually.
Oh, 31st. Okay.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to open it. Well, before I open it up for the co-hosts to start asking questions, I do want to ask both Myrenne and Dawn, and then I'm going to share mine, which I kind of already said a little bit. What is something that really stood out to you, such as your scene, character, idea that she had in the book that just really stood out to
you? About Rebecca's book?
About Rebecca's book, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Dawn, do you have something?
Okay. Yes. Okay, so you immersed yourself in the universe you created. That is completely clear, is that you dove in, and then when you wrote it like you were like a true crime kind of thing, like here's the facts and this is how it, you know, this is how it happens and this is what transpired between them. Because you were so immersed in it, you wrote it like I'm just telling the truth. That's it. It shows that way, and that's that. But I love the dedication. Like at the very beginning of the book, you put this in there: you are not your abuse. You are not what they did to you. You are not your trauma. You are the cleverness that survived. You are the courage that escaped. You are the power that hid and protected a tiny spark of your light. You will fan that spark into a bonfire of rage and love, and with it you will burn all of their lies to ash. He said the author is unknown. That, before I even started reading the book, that was like, oh, I already love it. Like, I already knew the direction that you were going to go, that it was about survival. And that meant a lot to me. I really love that.
That kind of brings me to something that I wanted to mention earlier that I did not, is one of the things that really stood out to me was the titles of your first 3 books. How many books are going to be in this series?
Currently planned for 9.
9. And like, you know, that was so much more powerful hearing it out loud than reading it on page. And I think all books should be read out loud at some point. But I really like the title, A Heart of Flame, and how it associates with Angie. And then you have A Soul of Light, which also seems to in a mind of smoke. So it makes me curious what the other ones will be titled.
I do intend to keep titling them in that format and trying to tie into some aspect that is really central to that story in that book, or a character that really comes to the forefront.
And for those who have not had the chance of reading it and who are listening to it, Angie, well, what is Angie's power?
So Angie is an elemental aura, which is somewhat rare in my magic system. Most people just have color auras, but some have an element. So Angie is a fire aura. Her magic is often seen as a swirl of smoke around her, and the color of it, from silver blues to purple blacks, and the smells of it, which I have a whole list of what smell equals what emotion Angie is feeling, all express where she is internally, what she wants to show the world. And in the moments where she's really stepping into her power, that smoke snaps into flame.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, before I ask Myrenne to say hers, excuse me, I'm going to say what my favorite part is the whole aura magical system that you have, and how they share like the way that they're feeling. And like one of the most powerful scenes I think is when her aura is like pretty much coloring her skin because it's so tight up and before she basically breaks, and he has to help her, get controlled. But I just love that. And I started asking like my neighbors, I was like, if our auras had colors, what do you think my colors would be? And I was like asking questions like that. And one of my friends, I loved this, is she went with the chakras. I don't know if you know what the chakras are, but like, she was like, well, you have a very good, like higher self. So she goes, I imagine you have purple and you're wise. So I imagine you have blue. And then she goes, and you have a big heart. So I imagine it's green. And so like we were going through like who other people we know, like what color their aura would be based on that. And I think the biggest compliment for a writer is when it causes the reader's imagination to spark a whole new world. And I would say that's what did it for me. Myrenne, what was something that really stood out for you?
Oh, I have to agree with both of your that's awesome because I do remember reading that quote and I remember thinking that exact same thing. I thought, wow, that is so powerful. So I love how even through Angie's hurt and her pain, and even though sometimes it gets ugly, Daniel does not give up on her. Like he is so dedicated to her no matter what the cost. And even if he doesn't end up with her, or even if he, I feel that way, even if he doesn't end up like being with her or being near her, it doesn't matter to him. The cost of her finding herself and her healing is worth anything that he can do. And I think most of us would probably say that is love at its core, right? Just willing to do anything you possibly can, even if it doesn't involve, you're taking yourself out of the equation. So I love that about the dynamic between the two of them and how she is constantly fighting with herself and through all of these things to figure out, how do I process, right? And he's like, you do what you've got to do, and I'm going to be here. And I love that about the dynamic between the two of them. So.
And one thing too that I just love about Angie is that here she's come from this world where she has been so completely, deeply betrayed. Her family has turned their back on her. She has had to scrape through her life, thoroughly discouraged. And still, she is unwilling to let go of doing what's right and doing what's kind. Like kindness to her is so important. To where, I mean, she deals with this demon in Falls Lake, and she doesn't ask for anything in return. She does it because she has the ability to do what's good and right. And so she does. And then later on, she has the ability to stand up for people. And so she does. Not because she has anything to gain. And I think that that is so strikingly different than the rest of the council and the rest of everybody in the magic community that are always, even Daniel, and even John to some point, where they always have to be so careful where they step. And she's like, I'm stepping right in it because people deserve to be defended. And I love that. I love it. Love it.
Thank you so much. Now, do you, sometimes I stutter. Anyway, now I'd like to open up the floor to either of our hosts, or I have some questions myself, but anyone can cut in at any time. Anybody can add anything. Dawn, do you mind starting off with a question to start the conversation?
Okay, so one of the things that is mentioned is that she was approached on the day she was supposed to die. So for the people that they choose to approach, do they always nab them right before they're supposed to die? Or is there some other rhyme or reason to why they make that choice and why it's done in that timing?
Yes. So recruitment in my world always happens in that moment where the person is fated to die unless someone intervenes. And that isn't directly addressed very much in book one. It definitely gets addressed more as the series goes on. In fact, I specifically named a whole new aspect of that in book 4, which I just finished writing. But that the reasons for that have a couple of layers. The first being The magic, once it is catalyzed, but it is locked by the courts, it continues to grow in strength. So by the time a person reaches their first fated death, it has reached a strength where they are deemed, strong enough to be worth contacting, worth unlocking and awakening and giving them access to their magic. Another aspect is simply, as I showed with Angie and Daniel, sometimes there can be a fair bit of resistance to this stranger dropping in out of nowhere and being like, hey, you have magic, you should come with me. So grabbing them in a moment that is likely a very low point in their life helps kick off that momentum to get the recruit to agree to go with the sponsor.
Yeah, not everybody gets Hagrid. You're a wizard, Harry. Not like that. It's not this lovely little thing here that happens. That's really interesting the way that you have thought it through in your world. Now, just a caveat of that, how would that change if they didn't have such strict controls on who they unlocked and how they opened things up?
So, spoiler alert to anyone watching, that is very much where the series goes after the end of book one. Because at the end of book one, Angie breaks those locks. She unlocks all English adepts who have had their catalyzing moment, but have not yet been informed about their magic. So one of the biggest impacts that comes from that is the locking keeps the magic under control. When it's unlocked and that person still dies at their fated moment when nobody intervenes, that magic is released rather explosively and causes a lot of damage and even might kill bystanders. So once they are unlocked, once a whole language is unlocked, anyone whose magic has come in, but they aren't aware of it, they aren't trained in it, it isn't awakened and like aligned with their conscious self, then they don't know it, but they're basically walking, talking time bombs. And in those moments of high stress and conflict where their fated death would happen, nobody can get to them in time or get to few of them in time. And so their death causes a great deal of damage because their magic is released in that moment. And that obviously creates a rather negative assessment of them by people in the larger world who don't have magic.
So I have a question that you kind of sparked in the moment is, so one thing that I was wondering, and because I think I got this from the book, but I want to make sure that I understood correctly, is they had no intention of unlocking Angie's, except for they wanted to cause Daniel to fall. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Milton Cartwright had a seer who was feeding him information, who he was mistreating to get that information. And he literally asked her, and this comes up more in books 2 and 3, like, hey, if I were to give a recruit to Daniel Fall, who should I pick who is most likely to end him? And she gave him, for her own motives as much as his own, the name Angie Forrester. So Angie would never have been unlocked if the antagonist, if the villain hadn't thought that she was going to kill Daniel.
And if his is more like wind, right?
Yes, he is an air aura.
So wind and fire.
Yeah. Milton Cartwright really hoped that her flames would consume his air down to nothing and end him.
Myrenne, do you have any questions?
Wow. Well, actually, I was just thinking when you say wind and fire, because I was thinking that too, like, but when fire is there and the wind blows, you better watch out because it's going to explode. So I think it kind of could go both ways. So that's very fast. That's interesting. I like that because normally people pair wind with water, right? Because they think, well, fire. Normally people think fire and water are kind of opposite, but you kind of did something else and did fire and wind, which is unique and different. So since we're talking about characters, which character was the most challenging for you to develop out of all of these? And it doesn't have to be like, it could even be a side character that's going to get even more developed later. But any character, which character do you think was the most challenging for you to develop?
Probably the antagonist, Milton Cartwright. I needed an antagonist and I had a pretty solid idea of, the archetype that I wanted to build for this antagonist that would offset specifically where Angie was coming from. But I had a really hard time, and I'm still not entirely sure that I couldn't have done better or done more with Milton Cartwright. because he serves a role, but I'm not sure I ever quite did him justice as a character. And if I ever do a rewrite and re-release a decade down the road, he's definitely the character that I already have slated as, okay, I need to do more work on that one.
I
I will
think
say
I agree. I think antagonists are hard to write. I'm in the same boat.
but I'm gonna say that I disagree just a little bit because there's some things that you did with Milton Cartwright that were so well done. Like when you describe his office as being too cluttered to be elegant. And it's like you can see it, like here's all this expensive stuff and it's all just kind of shoved into shelves, you know? And you're like, ah, so he loves expensive stuff, but he doesn't have any taste. And you get a few little pictures into just how awful he is, because with his husband, it says that he's angry that his husband could escape through astral projection. And that makes him at under what circumstances would his husband need to escape? There would be some pretty awful things going on. And so it gives you a real clear picture. So you did better than you think, but antagonists are hard to write.
Thank you.
I would agree with the antagonists are hard to write because that's actually where I'm needing to kind of polish in my own book that I'm currently editing at the moment. But I have a question for everybody actually, but I would like Rebecca to go first. Who is your favorite character to write about? And then I want you guys to say who your favorite character was to read about.
Oh man. So Angie, Daniel, and Jonathan were my favorites for very different reasons. Angie was my favorite for catharsis. Daniel was my favorite for it just flowed and I felt like I was really doing something cool. And Jonathan was my favorite because it was so grounding and it was delightful to immortalize someone that very, very dear to me that I lost years ago in that character and sort of try to bring that memory back to life in him.
What about you, Dawn?
So I really love Jonathan also, because what you see is what you get with Jonathan. And I love that about him and the way that you describe him and everything. And then you find out that he has family and children and he's just very invested in his world and he's super protective of Daniel. What I love best about Jonathan is that he sees people as they actually are. To me, that is one of the most valuable traits somebody could have, but we cannot skip over the maid at the end. Let me see if I say her name correctly here. Hold on. Mahina?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mahina. Here is this maid, and she's like, I didn't see you come in. There was a room there that wasn't there before. Nobody unpacked your clothes. My car's right outside. Kind of like, if you need to go, let's go. You know, I love her character. I'm like, yes, you go, girl, because she is just like Angie in the way that she's not going to stand by and just let someone be hurt. So I had to mention Mahina. Can't forget about her.
I actually really loved Daniel. I loved reading about Daniel. I loved a little bit, like I said earlier, I mean, I loved his willingness to kind of do anything that Angie needed. But I also love the fact that he has his own secrets and he's trying really hard not to screw it up this time. You know, like he is so torn between doing the right thing and remembering what he had done and, you know, trying to make it right, but yet justifying some things. And so it was a balance for him. And I every time something good happened, I kind of cheered a little bit inside for Daniel. So I really loved seeing him and his growth even as a character throughout as he went through his own journey with Angie.
I think for myself, I think because I could relate to both Jonathan and Daniel, they were my two favorites. And I think it's hilarious. So me and Rebecca always end up identifying with different characters, like vastly different characters. And we usually cannot relate to the one that the other one can relate to. So my guess is you probably can least identify with Jonathan and you can most with Angie. Is that correct?
Yes, though I do also strongly identify with Daniel. I feel like there is enough of like an alter ego thing going on with him that Angie and him are kind of two sides of the same coin, and I identify with both sides to some degree, but yeah, definitely Angie.
I identify most with Jonathan, but then Daniel, and I'm like, okay, so that means Rebecca's going to be with Angie and and not Jonathan.
Yep.
That's so
So,
funny.
speaking of the complex characters and the relationship with Angie and Daniel, how did you decide that they were going to be so explosive, so to speak, with the air and the fire, but not just that part, but just the relationships themselves?
So Daniel was invented in my mind, and I started writing him during a long period in my life where I was single. So a lot of me was sort of simulating not just an ideal man, but also very much what I'd hoped that my abuser could have been. And I know that might sound odd to folks who haven't been through that, but part of getting out of that cycle and retroactively naming that it was abusive and in what ways and why didn't I see that at the time was separating the dream that I was in love with and the reality that was mistreating me. So I think by the published version, the first book, Daniel doesn't hold that place as much as he did in the first draft, but he was very much invented to be someone that my unhealthy interests would latch on to, a bit dark, a bit mysterious, a bit maybe he's not good for me, but I'm going to run for him anyway. So having him be an air aura where he could feed Angie's flames, which is sort of that hope, that ideal, but also deprive her of oxygen so her flames cannot even start to burn, was this wonderful sort of balance that I knew I could play with in so many different ways and can intend to continue playing with for 9 books. And it was very much that, just having him be an air aura to her fire, because I always knew she was going to be a fire. That's the element that I feel like I would be. Having him be an air aura gave me so much room to play with. Is he going to help her or is he going to hurt her?
One thing I think about is, like there are abusive people, but some people use abuse. I don't know if that makes sense. And I kind of saw how both Angie and Daniel could use abuse a little bit in their relationship. I don't know if that makes sense. And they kind of learn with each other, especially after she after she creates that life strand, or what is that called? Life thread, or
Yeah, a life thread or a weird thread.
a weird thread. After she created that, you kind of get to see how they both recognize that they use abuse against each other, and they're kind of learning to break those cycles. And I think that's the difference between somebody who's abusive and somebody who's just trying to learn life, is I think we all can use abuse at times.
Yes, and that was something I did very consciously, was had them both have some toxic cycles that they were they were playing out and needed the opportunity to recognize it and then choose differently and do so.
That kind of leads into one of the questions that I had, and I know you've probably kind of sort of answered this already, but we've been talking about all of these things that you're putting into your book and the relationships and how they're treating each other. So after somebody reads a book like this and they read that dedication in the beginning and that quote at the beginning, what do you hope that someone takes away after reading your book? Like, how do you want a person to feel, and what do you want them to take away after reading your books?
I very much want them to feel empowered, but not in the toxic positivity kind of way, more in the manner of recognizing that even when they feel like they have no power, there is something that they can do, and that there is someone waiting to catch them when they step off that ledge. I understand, and I hope that everyone who reads the book, especially if the trauma themes and the escape themes personally relate to them, I know that they're going to bring their own issues to the table. I know that they're going to read that story through whatever lenses they are dealing with in their life. And it was very much my goal that if anyone came and read that story through the lens of being in abuse or just getting out of abuse or having gotten out of it a while ago, that those three lenses in particular would have a message in the story of you can get out, you did the right thing in getting out, and that's not the end. There is a future for you.
Those are all really powerful. I appreciate that very much. It's very
I
good.
wanted to talk just a little bit about the conversation that Angie and Daniel had, where he asks her if her ex hit her, and she said no, and he said, well, then maybe it really wasn't abuse. And then later on, and I made a note right in that on that page that people who are also abused but are in denial about it don't want to admit that what they went through was actually abuse, because it makes you feel powerless. And I see this a lot from the religious community that I come from, where women will say to other women, what he's doing to you is not that bad. It's not an abuse, abusive relationship. You can't leave. And the truth is they're going through the same thing, but they don't want to feel powerless. So they won't admit that it's also abuse, what they're dealing with. And then later on, they talk about it. So you tied that up beautifully. But I remember just feeling so sad, just knowing that it had to have been a slap across the face to Angie, but at the same time, understanding that he didn't want to feel any weaker than he already did. He was already had his lifeline cut short. He already had much of his power siphoned away from him. He was walking with a limp. Wait, at this point, I don't remember if she'd healed him yet. Anyway, but
Still walking with a limp by choice.
What'd you say?
He was still walking with a limp by choice, though.
Well, this is true. He felt like every single thing that he did, he had to walk on eggshells all the time. And so much of his life was completely taken from him. And he seems to be able to admit that what his former sponsor did was abuse, but not what his wife did. Because what his former sponsor did was so much worse. But it doesn't matter if it's so much worse. It's all abuse. And abuse still affects you, and it still is wrong, and it's still something worth getting away from. And I just remember feeling just so sad for him in that spot, just thinking, this poor man has been through so much, and he just doesn't want to feel powerless any more than he already does, and then later on they talked about it, and I thought that really buttoned it up nicely.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that came through, because that was one of the many layers that I really wanted to show, all of the different ways that it might look, especially years after the fact, which Daniel had been divorced for many years at that point. So showing that and then having him address it, and it does get addressed more in a later book, and he actually gets closure around it. One more layer in that message that I was really trying to get across. I'm glad you picked up on that.
I think one of the things about abuse is oftentimes we don't realize how abusive it is until we're out.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah.
Sometimes we just think, oh, it was a really hard time for me because I was so emotional. Like it must have been my fault. Like I just was having trouble handling this. And then you get out of it and you're like, maybe it wasn't so much me after all, as you're starting to uncover some of the things that they did or said, or because especially emotional abuse, because it can be so subtle.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And on that note, like when she talks about her former lover who had abused her, and she says, so diminished by him that she'd given him her soul and let him sing his own praises in her voice. Every betrayal carving away another piece of who she was, until she had nothing left of herself to give, to love, until she hated the sound of her own needs and swallowed her words like breath after breath of broken glass. I love that spot, because that is the reality of it. You're shaved away until you say, wait a minute, where is the person that I am?
It's just
Go ahead.
just Just so you know, Rebecca, Dawn has like written all throughout her book and dog-eared stuff. And yeah, so.
That all my dog-eared pages.
That line you just read out is my favorite line, without question, from the entire book, and will always be. It does not matter how many times I rewrite that scene or reread that scene. First of all, I can never change a word of it. And second of all, I cry every single time. And I wrote the line.
It is so complete. It lacks nothing. It is like creme brulee. It is a morsel of perfection.
I know one of the big things for me was the magic system. And, you know, I love how you attached it to the, to trauma, and then as well as the auras and all of that. So what made you, how did you come up with the idea of having the magic system attached to the aura?
Honestly, it was a series that I was obsessed with in my teens that I think was just called like the Immortal Nicholas Flamel series or something like that. But it introduced me to the idea of this auric magic. And then on top of that, I grew up running around my parents' property doing make-believe games with my sister, and that sort of sense of auric magic developed naturally over the decades that we ran around playing. And then specifically for the colors and such, my sister has synesthesia. She has a very strong color association with the names that she hears. So I think that is the coolest thing ever, and I hope she sees this. And that was a big part of my inspiration. So from the other series, I got the idea of the auras, particularly having smells. And then I've always loved the sort of elemental aspect. I was obsessed with Avatar: The Last Airbender. So that's where a lot of the elemental sort of stuff came in. And then my sister's synesthesia really inspired me to have the elements be in the minority. And most people just have a really strong color association with them.
Since my name is Angie, what color does Angie have?
Well, obviously smoky and fiery. But for you as a person, I think I would give you a yellow aura not dissimilar to Daniel's, but not necessarily an arrow aura, but you have this really nice sort of yellow idea to you.
I agree with that. That's what I would say. That was my instant reaction. Like, what color is your aura? Yeah.
So that would be a great one of those, like, you know, where you go, what type of aura are you in such and such a book, you know how they have like those little questionnaires, like what house do you belong to, right? Or whose dragon do you, that would be for your book, Rebecca. I'd be like, what aura is yours, you know, and what is your element? Like take the little quiz to find out and then post it. Like,
I'm gonna run off and do this right away.
Yeah, we need to make one.
Yeah, you definitely, if you have a website, you need to put that on there. Otherwise, you need to like do a little freebie and people can have fun with it. And yes, definitely.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would be fun. Well, I know that. So I would like to talk a little bit about the places that are in your book. And, you know, all of the half worlds got my brain frazzled. And I loved that because I was like, wait, what are we doing? Where are we going? So, and I know that obviously you mentioned Stonehenge. So is there any other places in your book that you drew from from real events? Because I know while I'm writing, when I write a line, all of a sudden I think, oh, that's from that movie, right? Because I love that spot in that movie. Or, oh, I remember this from this book that I read when I was a kid. And then I'm just going to stick it in here, you know, and you get those glimpses, right, of those little tiny snippets. So what kind of places did inspired you for the places in your book?
So almost all of the locations that I used were heavily based on places that I've personally experienced. So I grew up on those Nevada highways. So the fact that the first quarter of the book takes place on those Nevada highways, perfection. But I've also been able to travel to the UK several times, and the cottage that Angie and Daniel stay in at the conference is based on like the apartment before last that my aunt and uncle lived in the Cotswolds. And the conference site is based on wandering around Oxford. And I've been to Stonehenge. And so apart from the half worlds, which is very much me sitting at my computer going, how weird can I go? A lot of the locations are drawn from my literal physical experience, because then it's effortless to be fully descriptive and include all of the senses and really ground the reader in those spaces.
And it really lent some realism to the whole thing, because you could tell how much you loved those places by the way you wrote about them. You talked about the colors of the desert. The furthest west I have been is Utah. But how do you describe the colors as the sun is setting over the canyons? Like, it's phenomenal. But it shows up, your love for those places shows up in the way that you write about them.
Thank you.
And I'm anxious to read your book too, Myrenne.
Oh, oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. I'm excited
loving
to
your
talk about it.
insights.
I'll definitely give you a chance at the end. So if I remember right from our first interview, you had mentioned that Daniel was based on a possible crush that started from a fan fiction. Do you mind?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh, we gotta hear about that.
So my to date slightly biggest and longest lasting celebrity crush is Robert Carlyle. And I watched the TV show Once Upon a Time whenever it hit Netflix many, many years ago. And I wasn't the biggest fan of the show, but his character in that show was Mr. Gold. And that character had very, very strong influence in developing Daniel. And the whole idea for Unlocked very tangentially started as a Once Upon a Time fanfic, and then immediately got wildly out of control for that and became its own thing.
Now I'm never going to read Daniel and not think about him.
Well, I mean,
I personally approve of this. Yes,
look at that.
that's a very sexy gentleman right there.
Oh, very nice.
I have a whole
That
Pinterest board of
actually
pictures of
helps.
him that I go to every time I need to write Daniel. It's just like, all right, let me just go all heart-eyed for a second.
Love it.
All right, I want to give everyone one last opportunity to ask a question. So if there's a burning question you have not yet asked, this is your opportunity. Myrenne, do you want to go first?
Well, actually, I only had 3 questions and I asked them all, but I'm going to ask this new one because now that we've been talking about it. So I know you have 3 books. You said you just finished book 4 and you're going to write 9. So can you give us a glimpse of some exciting things you have kind of toiling in the back of the gears that we can look forward to? Just little dangling carrots.
Absolutely. So I actually did lunch today with a writer friend of mine and had this exact same conversation. So I feel like I got my warm-up round in, so this is perfect. So the dangle for the middle trilogy, so books 4, 5, and 6, is that there's another fire aura who comes in, and I did everything I could to make them different from Angie. And you'll get to see just how badly that fire-air relationship could have gone, but didn't, between Daniel and Angie. And also, Angie and Daniel are flawed people, and their world is kind of going to shit because they have been fighting back against the powers. So they each have a little bit of a villain arc that will take them to the darkest places that I'm sure you can already guess they might be able to go to from book 1 before I start hauling them back up for the happy ending at the end of the series. The little snippets for the last 3 books, so 7, 8, 9, are that I barely touched on this in the first book, but it comes in more in the later books. The official religion of the Empire is the ancient Roman pantheon. And right about the beginning of book 7, you're going to meet one of those gods, and it is going to unite humanity in some interesting ways to eventually move them through this whole world journey that they're going on of dragging the world along on the internal changes that they're going on to eventually, at the very, very end of the series, reach a point where magic can provide for everyone's needs and no one is taking advantage, and not only the couple but the world will get a happily ever after.
One thing I was thinking about when you were talking is you had mentioned how you wish you would have like evolved the villain a little bit more, but I actually view, he is definitely a villain, but I kind of view Angie as kind of her own villain, or it's actually her past, really, is her villain. And so is Daniel's past. And I kind of view that as more of the villain of the story than.
I very intentionally name her demons, not demons like from Half Worlds, but the demons in her heart are absolutely a massive antagonist in the entire series.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to ask, so did her training as a gladiator, because she was a gladiator, right?
Yes,
Did her training and the self-discipline that she had to have as a gladiator, did that serve her in her magic? And I have a second question to it. Start with that.
serve her in her magic, maybe not, but serve her in not being entirely dependent on it, absolutely. And that becomes a massive thing in book 2. She heavily relies on it in book 2.
Very cool. Because she kind of ruled at that gas station. She knew what she was doing. But I was just wondering if the discipline was something that she pulled from as she was trying to learn control.
Yeah, no, because the she has the physical discipline, which does serve her, but she will continue to lack significant emotional discipline for a while yet.
Okay. Okay. So here's the other thing too that I thought was so well depicted. Part of Angie's issue from the way that I'm watching, and I'm looking at where she's like too broken, too tired, and too ruined to ever heal, to ever be fixed. And if I ever get broken again, Daniel, by you or anyone else, I won't survive it. But she seemed to mistrust herself and her ability to recognize what was red flags and what wasn't. And as somebody coming from that, I identified really closely with that because I think a lot of us who are coming out of abusive situations, we say, oh, now I see that this friendship that I cultivated over this time was really not good for me. And this person was actually very abusive, and they just kind of adopted me as their friend. And then it turned out to be this really nasty thing. And you get to the point where you're like, yeah, I don't need any new friends. No, thank you. Because you don't trust yourself to be able to decide whether or not you're able to actually notice the red flags or not because they feel like home. And I thought that was beautifully handled in the book. That as she's wrestling with this, it's part of it is just because she's like, I don't even know who he really is. How could I possibly even know who he really is? Because I don't trust myself enough to trust anything. I thought it was well done.
Thank you.
My original question was actually what Myron's was, where is this series going? Is there something that you have not yet shared that might give us a little perk our interest for future that you have not yet shared?
Well, why don't I just tease the next book in the series a little bit? Because honestly, I think book 2 is my favorite that I have ever written. So in book 2, you get to see a lot more of the half-worlds and under some really dire circumstances that are truly going to test Angie and Daniel to their limits. And I adore what I was able to do in that book and showing Angie, she gets banished, so sent out into very, very far distant half worlds. And it takes her more than a year and a half to get home, of going through these half worlds and facing demons, both external and internal, and just trying to get home. And I won't spoil more than that, but I highly, highly enjoy rereading book 2. And she finally confronts some of the secondary characters like Noah, who, Dawn, you were just talking about how that sort of abuse cycle can also affect like friendships, and the character of Noah is a little bit shamelessly based on a friend of mine who I had that realization with of, oh, this is not healthy. And it ended rather painfully and at a very bad moment in my life. So there's a scene in book 2 where Angie is talking to Noah, and the conversation is almost word for word for like a page and a half, 2 pages, a conversation that I had with my friend when that friendship ended. And I feel like I really brought some very real and very raw emotions to the page throughout that story as well.
Wow.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca. I really appreciate it, especially since this one is so special to me. Not only is it our first live, but also just because, I feel like you've been with me since the beginning of the writing corner with Authors Alcove, and also the beginning of this Meet the Author book club. So I just feel so honored that you're here. And I also just want to thank you, Myrenne Mae and Dawn Marie. But Myrenne, we are going to do your book next month, and it's going to be August 30th, I believe. Not August, excuse me, September 30th. I'm going to double check my calendar here. Is that what it
Oh,
is?
yes. Oh, for the thing. Yeah, I'd have to double check too.
Okay. Well, I will check that in just a moment, because now I have the Weather Channel up on my computer. So that's so it should be the last Tuesday in September, and we're meeting again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And can you just share your book title and what we should expect from it?
Yes. Before I do, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for Rebecca to thank you for putting your heart out there for us, and for just being so strong to write those words, because I know that's not easy. And I know you probably, worked through some really tough stuff to get that out on that paper. So thank you for being brave and for being a voice for people who might need that voice. So I just appreciate that so much. And thank you also for being one of my helpers too, because she gave me all kinds of feedback on my book when I wrote it. And so she was pages and pages. So my book is called 3 Coins from a Dead Man's Pocket. It is book 1 in the Realm of Souls saga. And I'll give you the little tagline. It is a daring druidess with a 1,000-year-old secret, a fiery love that defies the magic of the realms, and an ancient, desperate soul hungry for vengeance. So that is, and if you think I said Druis wrong, everybody says, no, it's not Druis, it's Druid. And I said, well, I changed it to Druis because we have actors and we have actresses. So we have Druids and we have Druises in my book. So any female who has Druidic magic is a Druid. I was like, I'm just going to change it. And I can't wait to just kind of spread the love for this book, and to get to talk about it. So thank you for the invite. Thank you for having me here. And it's been great.
Thank you so much. Oh,
I'm
Dawn,
sorry.
you say something?
I was just gonna say it was so nice to meet you, Myrenne. So glad.
Thank you
I get
so
to
much,
meet you
Dawn.
today.
Yeah. I love hearing your feedback too, and all of your comments and stuff. I thought, oh my goodness, that's fantastic. I hope someone does that to my book.
Well, I can't wait to read your book. It sounds very intriguing.
Oh, thank
And
you. Thank you
normally
very
we
much.
have a third person on here and she will be with us next month, I hope. But she had COVID, so she could not be on here, and she is just as equally as insightful as both Rebecca and Dawn Marie. So I'm really looking forward to next month, because she'll hopefully be back, and then so you'll have all three of us to talk.
Great.
And having already read 3 Coins from a Dead Man's Pocket, highly recommend. Y'all should read it. Just saying.
Thank you.
Gonna do my little plug here as the editor.
And before I say goodbye, you guys stay on, because I'm going to stop the live, but I do want you guys to stay on. I want to share about upcoming happenings at the Reading Nook with Authors Alcove. Starting in October, we are going to be starting a kind of a geekathon, I guess, once a week, except for book club week. We will be meeting on Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's 7 p.m. Central Standard Time and on down. And we're just going to be taking one of the popular, either now or yesterday's popular fantasy books, and just geeking out over them. If you want to sign up to be one of those that talks about it, you're more than welcome. It's going to be me, and then who else? These guys may join at some point. I don't know, but they may not. And you can go to authorsalcove.com, look under for readers, and you will find the schedule. And then you can shoot me a message with your ideas or whether you would like to be one of my guests. But anyway, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys joining me.
Thank you, Agnes.
And let's see if I can successfully get off this live, because I have found that it's a lot harder for me than it should.